This is Jerome Corsi, and today is Tuesday, June 6th, 2023. And we've got a lot to cover today. Let's get right into it. This first story, which I find pretty astounding, not surprising actually, suggests that the lab-grown meat produces 25 times more carbon dioxide than real beef. Now, this is a study that was done. It's a fairly credible study. I mean, it's yet in peer review. It's not yet peer reviewed. It's been submitted for peer review, but it's so explosive that it's been released early on a journal that publishes articles that are going into peer review. At any rate, it says that lab-grown meat, by the way, they call this meat ACBM, which is animal cell-based meat. So ACBM, we're all supposed to eat ACBM rather than beef. Okay, and what they've shown here is that and by the way, what they do is it's fairly brutal what they do. They take basically calves, they're using fetal parts to start this. I mean, it's a whole complicated process in which they get the seed material from which to grow the meat. And what it has is that there's an increased level of carbon dioxide because of the hydrocarbon fuels that are needed during the purification processes that supply the cultured cells with nutrients. So the elimination of N toxins, which is critical when creating cultured meat, as bacteria in the environment release these toxins. Even a small amount of these toxins in the growing medium can hinder the cells from reproducing. So, quote, cell culture is traditionally done with growth medium components which have been refined to remove or reduce endotoxin. Write the study authors. The use of these refinement methods contributes significantly to the economic costs associated with the pharmaceutical products, since they are both energy and resource intensive. Okay, so in other words, to produce this lab-grown meat, which is a pharmaceutical process, they have to have a pure environment so it doesn't get these toxins built into it, which make the ACBM, the cell-based meat, animal cell-based meat. It's hard even to get my mind around that concept. So it's another case, I think, where the environmental movement has morphed into really a neo-Marxist movement, which is now aimed at destroying capitalism. All these ideas are Glenn Beck had a great point this weekend. He was at a little spot in which he said, now, how is this idea working out for you? Which we should ask over and over again to the socialists, communists, the neo-Marxists, the woke. How is it working out for you that we don't eat beef anymore? How's that going? And so they aren't saving carbon dioxide by getting rid of cows. When cows they want to get rid of because they fart methane, and methane's a greenhouse gas. Now, methane's a very insignificant greenhouse gas. And in fact, methane's not, like any of the hydrocarbon fuels, it's not fossil fuel. It's made naturally by the earth on an ongoing basis. There's a lot of methane in one of the moons of Saturn. Well, there were no cows up there to produce the methane, I guarantee you. So here we've got another insane idea from the left that we're all supposed to buy and say, oh, this is great. I'm going to save the world. I'm going to save the earth. First of all, the earth doesn't need us to save it. The earth has gone through 4.6 billion years of that 4.5 billion, according to the scientists. And it had 5 major extinctions before human beings showed up, which about everything living on Earth was gone. This place is subject to cataclysmic change. We've been hit by massive asteroids, which killed the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. We've had 1,000 years of volcanic activity. The planet is dramatically different than it was billions of years ago. And human beings are just the latest creatures walking on the face of the earth. And we're probably pretty insignificant to the earth, except to ourselves. But these insane ideas are prominent among the left who want to destroy capitalism and want to get us convinced to commit suicide, essentially. Now, the second story, Germany is cutting back on meat production to fight global warming. Now, just like in the Netherlands, when they shut down farms, this stuff is insane. This is from hotair.com. Germany is caught up in the demands of climate change lobby to reduce its carbon footprint drastically. So they basically want to reduce all livestock on German farms. And so the German meat industry has reported that the country is soon going to be facing a severe meat shortage by the time spring arrives, and consumers should expect prices to skyrocket, potentially doubling in some cases. It would appear that some people in the German government have never heard of something called the law of supply and demand, but at least they're going to defeat global warming. Yeah, right. That's a laugh. Die Welt, which is the German meat industry, a site of the German Meat Industry Association, which reported last week that within 4 to 6 months, Germany will face a meat shortage. Prices will skyrocket. Pork is expected to experience the worst shortages. The issues in meat supply are less due to Berlin insisting on reducing the number of livestock by 50%. The issues in meat supply are due to Berlin insisting on reducing the number of livestock by 50% to reduce global warming. Well, why don't they reduce the number of Germans? Because we exhale carbon dioxide. That's where they're going next. And how's this idea working out for you? Well, the socialists and the communists produce famine. My two books, which I'm going to highlight, which one has done very well out already, which is The Truth About Truth About Energy, Global Warming, and Climate Change. I really encourage you to read it. It's not necessarily an easy read. It's substantial. But if you do read it, you're going to find out that, in fact, the climate is a very complex system, and we human beings, and carbon dioxide is not a major element in the climate. Wind currents are much more. Now, we're going to be reading and talking about El Nino, which is going to come back again, and it's going to be warm water currents, which are going to disrupt the climate in the United States, the weather, and that's going to be based on global warming. Everything's based on global warming. The second book in this series, I'm calling the series The Great Awakening Trilogy. This is volume 1. Volume 2, which is in press right now, will be out soon, is The Truth About. These 3 books are all going to be the truth about neo-Marxism, cultural Maoism, and anarchy, and it's exposing the woke lies. Again, this is insanity, and its aim is to shut down anything we have which is productive, anything that we have that supplies cheap energy upon which our economy is based. Chris, would you like to comment? These, I think, are critical issues. I'm not going to let up on. Go ahead.
As well, you shouldn't, because these people say they're saving the world. It's time to cripple farmers. It's time to stop wasting paper and create digital currencies. All good for the environment. And all the people who shout and whine about this all they have to do is really type on social media and pat themselves on the back over agreeing with some of these silly ideas. Creating food shortages does not help anybody. You want to help the earth? You can. Pick up some garbage. If you've gone to these major cities where these same lefties run them, they're not only are they crime-ridden, they're litter-ridden, and a lot of these areas smell because they allow people to urinate in the streets. Clean up your streets, okay? Pick up your own garbage, pick up after your dog, and pick up after yourself.
Yeah, the left always creates homelessness, that creates disaster, it creates all kinds of destruction. It's negative. It is not, they fool people on, we're going to save the earth. And you get Gretchen out there crying, and she's desperate because the world is going to end if we don't quit using hydrocarbon fuels. It's nonsense. Okay, now the next 2 stories are actually kind of frightening, and it's coming. The World Health Organization is now calling for a simulation this year to prep for the next global health crisis. Well, again, this is same thing that Gates did and others did. These leftist monsters, these new world order creeps, which is, again, I think the whole woke phenomenon is just to destroy capitalism. Once capitalism is destroyed, once people are weakened, they're made to be obedient, we bow down to authority, we don't question, then the World Health Organization oligarchs take over, and they basically come in and say, we and our machines will make the rest of you slaves. And the woke will be the first to go. They will be the useful idiots who destroyed capitalism, and they're not useful any longer because the World Health Organization is not interested in themselves being destroyed. What they want to do is enslave us. By the way, watch Plandemic 3. It is imperative that you begin to get into understanding that this is all about totalitarianism and structuring control on a massive level. So at any rate, this story is 194 nations continue to work through this draft of pandemic agreements, which would give more authority to the World Health Organization. They have a global preparedness monitoring board that's convened by the World Health Organization, which is a UN body. This UN is another disaster. At any rate, it's called for a worldwide pandemic simulation to be carried out by the end of this year to test the effectiveness of the new terms before the member nations sign them. Quote, we feel strongly that we cannot wait for the next emergency to find out how well the pandemic accord and these new amendments, we need to know how they're going to work now. Therefore, we suggest the member states, together with key stakeholders. I love this when they talk about stakeholders. This is leftist governmental bureaucratic mumbo jumbo. They carry out a simulation exercise based on the draft accord. Okay, so they're going to prepare us by having a mock pandemic, and they're going to show us how we're going to all be locked down again, how the society is going to take control, and how they're going to, in fact, demand our obedience. And this is, I think, insanity. It goes along with the next story that I want to cover, which is really one I posted later this, as I was getting these ready, which is that there's a study coming out of the this Institute of Economic Affairs in Great Britain, which is a really systematic scientific study. It's about 200 and some pages long. You can download it on the internet. And what they found is the lockdowns did not save lives by any significant amount during the pandemic. They did an analysis of the lockdowns reported in various studies. They compiled the data, and the lockdowns reduced mortality by 3.2% when compared to the less stringent policies adopted by countries like Sweden, which did not lock down, which means that they prevented only 4,000 deaths in the United States, but in typical flu season, there's about 38,000 deaths in the United States in a typical flu season. So, in other words, what the modeling exercises show that before the pandemic, they had all these modeling exercises that the Fauci was carrying around the White House, saying that lockdowns would save 400,000 lives in the UK and 2 million lives in the United States. That was just nonsense. Those were made up numbers based on modeling, which is the same thing they do in the climate so-called science, is they create models which are rigged to produce the outcomes these scientists want to show. So they walk into Donald Trump and they say, if you don't lock down, 2 million people are going to die because you didn't take the right measures. Well, Donald Trump should have thrown Fauci out on his behind and gotten him out of the White House altogether, because it was a lie and their studies were rigged. This study, which is the first all-encompassing evaluation of the research of the effectiveness of mandatory restrictions on mortality, this is according to one of the co-authors of the study, Dr. Lars Jonung, who's a professor emeritus at the Kurt Wicksell Center for Financial Studies at Sweden's Lund University, demonstrate that lockdowns were a failed promise. They had negligible health effects, but a disastrous economic, social, and political cost to society. And that's also being reported today on Zero Hedge, which has a very good story. I'll find it here in just a second. Chris, you want to comment?
We warned you ahead of time. I mean, not you. We warned people ahead of time that the lockdowns weren't going to help anybody. In fact, if you think about it, you live in an urban area, right? Where are you going to be locked down for the most part? Regular people are going to be locked down in these apartments with maybe moderate to fair ventilation. They're together in these cubbies. And believe me, you're in a relatively enclosed space with a lot more people. A couple of them get sick, that will spread. It's not like you're locking down into a room, into a panic room with a load of rubber padding and disease proofness. There is ventilation. Excuse me. There are ways for the virus to travel through. And again, the other thing about the lockdowns is they cause job loss. They cause depression. They arguably caused a lot more suicides. It probably made things worse rather than had little to no effect. But the study's telling us at least it had little to no effect.
Well, this is I was referring to Jeffrey Tucker, who writes in the Brownstone Institute right now that there were 20 grim realities that were unearthed by the lockdowns, and the list includes surveillance and censorship by big tech, increasing the power and influence of big pharma, government propaganda by big media, corruption of health officials, consolidation of industry. This is the free enterprise supposed to be free, but when workers, industries, and brands were divided between essential and non-essential, where were the howls from big business? Influence and power of the administrative state, the huge bureaucracy that took over, cowardice of intellectuals, that's always a hard word, pusillanimity, the small-mindedness of universities.
Oh, a Dr. Smith word.
Yeah, that's right. Pusillanimous, that's right. Spineless of think tanks were spineless. The madness of crowds, people went along with this. The ideological conviction of both right and wrong, betraying their ideals. The right abandoned affection for limited government, and the left turned against its traditional stand for civil liberties, equal freedoms, and free speech. The sadism of the ruling class, the real-life problems of massive class inequality. It goes on. The cravenness and corruption of public education, the enabling of central banking to fund it all, the shallowness of the faith communities that didn't fight this, the limitations on travel, the tolerance for segregation, the goal of social credit system, and corporatism is the system under which we all live, giving lie to existing ideological systems. The corporations took over and the bureaucrats took over. The lockdown, the next thing they'll do is like they did in China, they'll lock you in your house and let you die. You go outside, go ahead, Chris.
I apologize for jumping
in.
No,
please,
quickly,
just go ahead.
But it is often said that the small businesses are the backbone of America. Not every politician, but a lot of politicians who want to get into office say small business is the backbone of America. The lockdowns seem to be almost designed as a way to take advantage and shut down some of these small businesses to give corporations an advantage. Hence, you couldn't go to your corner store. You couldn't go to the mom and pop stores. You couldn't even pick up something at the local diner for a little bit. But you can go to Walmart, pick up whatever you want. They were always open. Walmart, although the big box stores were open, but little mom and pop stores, they were forced to shut down.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, this was a disaster, and I think the World Health Organization is prepping us for it again, and the World Health Organization intends for this international treaty to be signed by the United States and others, which will give its sovereignty over the United States government, so that the World Health Organization orders a lockdown. We're supposed to follow it. By the way, this is complete economic destruction, and I'm going to start publicizing this next week or so. By around the 15th, I'm going to get much more public on this new book, which is the, we're going to have I think the next thing is going to be a global economic crash, and it's going to lead to an historic gold rush. Take a look at Swiss America, on our website, one of the sponsors, Dean Heskin of Swiss America co-authored this book with me. And what we're saying is the last two economic crises, in 1970s and in 2008, gold doubled. It will probably double again. I see a systematic failure of the banking system worldwide as the commercial real estate trashes, which it's doing. The vacancies are about 30 to 40% in most U.S. cities right now in large commercial buildings. People aren't going back to work. This Walking Liberty half dollar as an introductory offer with Swiss America, you can get 250 of these coins. They are very high in silver content, and it's really a lost leader because you can buy these coins from Swiss America, 250 of them, at up to that number for really the cost of what the silver is worth today on the market. And I think silver is going to appreciate dramatically. Please take a look at this offer and follow up on it. Just fill out the form. Swiss America will contact you. And they can also help you put your IRAs and your 401ks in gold, and to do it by the rules so you don't lose those 401ks, the tax advantages of them, or your IRAs. Next two stories. Russia's announcing that this Ukraine offensive, which they started yesterday, evidently, is already failing. Russia's saying it thwarted a major attack, and 250 Ukrainian troops were killed, not Iranian, Ukrainian. Iran will be next in the next hot war, I'm sure. At any rate, the Russian military put out a statement saying the enemy failed to reach its goals and was unsuccessful. During the day, the occupiers, the Ukrainians somehow made about 23 attacks, but they evidently achieved very little. And the Ukrainian military is not pushing back on the story, which strongly suggests that this counteroffensive was really a ruse for Zelensky to get the United States to give more money and more weapons. We've given away billions. What about all the weapons we abandoned in Afghanistan when Biden pulled out in such a disastrous way? Well, again, the mainstream media is not reporting on it. All of this is getting ignored by the mainstream media. And if you read the Wall Street Journal and New York Times, you're going to think everything is just fine. I mean, I'm going to cover that with a one story, but I'm just going to, for 1 minute, pull up the New York Times. And here's what there was a critical dam that was destroyed in Ukraine front line, by the way, and it flooded a major area. That probably is a Russian attack. But what are we covering in the New York Times today? Well, Prince Harry testifies in court in a phone hacking lawsuit. Well, isn't that swell? Great. And for Chris Christie, winning would be great. He can beat Trump. So we've got a couple anti-Trump stories. We've got a larger screens, heated seats, sushi, theater owners want you back. Okay, where's the economic crisis reported? What about Biden? What about Biden, the Biden crime family? No, we got to make sure, can Apple take the metaverse mainstream? Can we make the metaverse our new reality? The attack on reality is astounding. The fundamentally woke is an attack on reality. It's attack on have as many genders as you want. Well, that makes sense. Okay, now this other story I want to cover today, and again, the New York Times finally was kind of forced to report that the Ukrainian soldiers, the journalists are actually going around asking the Ukrainian soldiers to hide their Nazi patches. The truth is, a lot of these soldiers fighting for Zelensky in Ukraine, while our press represents them as freedom fighters and they're beating back Putin, they are Nazis. Western part of Ukraine has always been aligned with Germany, at least since World War II. They were Nazi, and they are Nazi. And these paramilitary units have helmets like the Nazis did. They have swastikas. They have the skull and bones Nazi patches. And our media hides it. In fact, our media says, please don't wear those. We can't take your pictures. We can't portray you as freedom fighters. But in fact, if you take a look at the New York Times report, and I did, it was out there yesterday, and I was actually shocked that the New York Times was reporting this. It must be because the issue is about to break into the mainstream media. that these Ukrainians are wearing patches and symbols that were made notorious by Nazi Germany. And these patches feature symbols, again, that they don't want seen. They don't want known the complicated relationship the Ukrainian fighters have with Nazi imagery. It's a thorny and complicated problem. New York Times says, no, it's not complicated at all. We're fighting with the Nazis. And Putin is saying, wait a minute, you want to get Ukraine into NATO. This is just too close to Russia. You're interfering on my sphere of influence, which has always been Ukraine, Finland, Sweden. Russia needs access to the Atlantic Ocean, and it can only get it through the Baltic Sea or through the Black Sea. Chris, you want to comment?
Back in 2017 or 2018, I actually forgot the year Zelensky was elected, but I remember when he was called Mini Trump, a Nazi by these same left-wing media outlets, and it was relentless for a while. It was always the Ukrainians are Nazis. They were controlled by Nazis. And one side of Ukraine is all Nazi. There's Nazi influence in the Ukrainian government. All of a sudden, Putin, who apparently was the boogeyman as far as the 2016 election, invades Ukraine because somebody who was president just couldn't keep an eye on things or keep control of what's going on around the world. All of a sudden, the Ukrainians are altruistic and perfect angels, just like the same people who want to destroy the food supply in the name of climate change.
Well, what we're seeing is a world that's gone insane. Satan is just running around having a field day. And we've got increasing money and weapons going into Ukraine with lies being told by our media. It's the same kind of pandemic, manufacturing a story. This is a created reality, which is that we need to beat Putin. Well, I mean, the Russian collusion was a lie that Hillary concocted. The left has hated Russia since Russia took down the Berlin Wall. Russia renounced communism. That made the left go insane. So the left is out there to destroy Putin. Well, destroying Putin is probably not a very good idea. Jack Kennedy was most likely killed, and I think Robert Kennedy Jr. would agree with this, out there because Jack Kennedy had written something like 26 private letters to Khrushchev, reaching out and saying our military-industrial complex, like Eisenhower has warned, is taking over, and they want to go to war. And Khrushchev said, I've got the same problem. Well, if you get two heads of state who could send the entire bureaucracy, send the CIA and the entire bureaucracy out to Death Valley and re-headquarter them there, there's nothing that says bureaucracy has to be in Washington, D.C. Move it to Death Valley. These bureaucrats have civil service, fine. Let them move to Death Valley and get air conditioners, except that they probably produce too much carbon dioxide. So just sweat. But go out there, and if you want your job, that's where you're going to have to relocate to. That's the only way we can get rid of this problem. And Kennedy and Khrushchev knew that the two of them together could stand down from the Cuban Missile Crisis, which they did, could begin to implement arms limitations, which they did, and both of them were deposed within a very short period of time by the military-industrial complexes that wouldn't tolerate the world going to peace. This is a very dangerous situation that we're in right now, and you could easily see Russia, reported last week, has moved tactical nuclear weapons into Belarus. Taiwan continues to heat up, and no one came to the support of Hong Kong when they were marching in the streets with American flags begging not to be taken over by China. China had promised that they would not take over Hong Kong. Yeah, laugh, laugh, ha, ha. China did take over Hong Kong, just waited a little bit to do it. And China will move on Taiwan. We've got now meeting the BRICS nations, the British, Russians, India, China, and South Africa. They're going to probably admit the OPEC countries and a bunch of others, including Iran. Iran's building nuclear weapons with the support of Russia and China, and Iran's putting drones into giving them to Russia to test on the battlefield in Ukraine. If we, the whole world is rapidly hurtling towards world war, which is what the neo-Marxists, what's characterized by neo-Marxism, this is my second book on neo-Marxism, shows that both in Russia and in China, when Lenin and Stalin took over, millions died in the collective farm experiment in the 1930s. Millions, including millions in Ukraine, were starved to death. It's a miserable death. And when the communists took over, and with Mao and China, they had the great leap forward, millions again died of starvation. Estimates are Mao killed over 50 or 60 million people. And probably the largest number ever, although World War II would rival it. But at any rate, and today we see all the signs again. We're cutting down the food supply. That's insane. We're trying to help people eat bugs, don't eat meat. You don't need to use gasoline, hydrocarbon fuels. Save the earth. What are we saving the earth for? To be slaves? Without freedom, which our founding fathers bequeathed us, without our rights and liberties coming from God, we will be under the control of these devils, and I mean devils in the literal sense, these demons who are happy to lie. If someone from the government says something, I think the first principle is assume they're lying. Just ask yourself why they're lying. Biden says something, assume he's lying. If he can remember what he's saying, I mean, how can you have a president who is obviously experiencing senior dementia? It's insane. Chris, any final comments before we wrap up?
Another funny thing is, how in the heck did the New York Times become, or remain, I should say, the paper of record? You did mention the Ukrainian starvation. The Times has a long history of fabricating stories or hiding things to create an illusion of a big story, and they keep getting away with it every time. Or they try to elevate something to push a cause. We know about Walter Duranty, but if you remember the Martha Burke stories, where the Masters tournament was going on, and if all of a sudden the front page of the Times was littered with all this Martha Burke woman trying to get a bunch of women's coalitions together to protest that women were not allowed in Augusta. It wasn't even a real story, but there were other big things happening at the same time.
Well, let me interrupt for a minute. Duranty was the reporter the New York Times sent to Russia during the starvation of the collective farms, and he refused to report it. He was reporting how wonderful Stalin was doing. He had a lie in the 1930s. And by the way, he was a Satanist.
And he won a Pulitzer, by the way.
Yeah, he won a Pulitzer. Brilliant
reporting.
And all it was a lie. It was completely 100% Soviet Stalin propaganda. And the New York Times published it as truth, and people in the United States believed it because it was the New York Times. To this day, it's believed that the Russian collective farm experiment was successful. It wasn't. Killed millions and millions of people. And they killed the Ukrainians intentionally. The Soviets came in and took the food from the people and let them starve, made them starve. They couldn't get out of Ukraine or they'd be killed. They made them stay there and die of famine. And the same thing was done by Mao. Mao had promised this great cultural revolution. It was going to be, they were going to save the world. They're going to end capitalism. All he did is kill 40 or 50 million Chinese. And do you think that's reported? Do you think that's go get the Black Book of Communism, which was very popular in Europe during the 90s, which what it did is it documented every place communism has been and socialism have been mass murders. These people are murderers. They hate people. They want to be God themselves. And they think, like the World Health Organization, that they can be as Nietzsche said, the Ubermensch, the supermen, and they will come in and save the world. No, they'll destroy the world. And this time around, if they're not stopped, they'll have nuclear war, and it won't be much left to save. Planet probably flourish in nuclear war because look at Hiroshima. Some 50, 60, 70 years later, it's flourishing. The nuclear energy the planet will absorb will die of the radiation. But do you think that Klaus Schwab of the World Health Organization World Economic Forum, these world organizations. You think they'll care? No, it's what they're planning. That's the problem. Watch Plandemic. Please read the books I'm writing. I'm trying desperately to get this word out. Chris, last statements?
And I just want to say, to this day, the New York Times still refuses to rebuke the Walter Duranty stories, take his mural or portion of the mural off of his painting, whatever it was, his honor off of its wall, and the Pulitzer Prize people refuse to pull that back, even though we know the entire concoction of stories were complete lies.
In my next book coming out, and the one that is in press now, the truth about neo-Marxism, cultural Maoism, and anarchy, I write extensively about Duranty, about his sexual escapades, his Satanism, his bizarre sexual behavior, which was a cult. And this was the guy who was over there in Russia being treated like a king, and reporting lies that Stalin was this great hero and the economics of the collective farms were a success. He, now dead, should pay the price in hell for all the people he murdered, the millions he murdered by his lies.
It's just as
it's up to God. That's up to God. But I'm telling you, these demons, that human beings are susceptible to mass phenomenon, and unfortunately, our psychology does not allow us to understand that we're being led to our own deaths by believing the lies of the global warming crowd. The scientists are paid by the government, and if they want to maintain their positions in universities, they dare not speak out that global warming because of carbon dioxide is not only a lie, it's a silly idea. And any legitimate climate scientist knows it. Let's wrap up, Chris. Today, this is Dr. Jerome Corsi, my producer, Chris. Today is Tuesday, June 6, 2023. In the end, God always wins, and God will win here too. It may not be pleasant getting there, but God created this place, God rules this place, and God can unplug this place anytime he wants to. And God will have the last word, and God will win. I think in the spirit of 2 Chronicles 7:14, we ought to get down on our knees and repent for allowing the Supreme Court to take prayer out of the schools, God out of the schools. It was the beginning of destroying the family and everything that the left knows it can do to deconstruct and eliminate God. I'd rather see the elimination of Stalin, Mao, and all these leftists that we have to deal with now. And there's a long list of them, Obama. These are people who are destructive. And allowed to carry their plans to the extreme, we will have nuclear war, which I hesitate to think is not that far away, especially not with Iran getting nuclear weapons. I've been writing since 2006 warning people that Iran will have a nuclear attack. They'll launch it on Israel. Israel knows it. I've been to Israel many times and talked with the government. Israel's prepared, but it will be the climactic battle that will probably usher in World War III. Let's pray it doesn't happen. Dr. Jerome Corsi, thank you for joining us. God bless. We will be back tomorrow at thetruthcentral.com. God bless.